Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Flipside. I am always saying this at the top of the program about how excited I am for my guest. And I guess that's a good thing because it just shows how into these interviews I am. But today is special because the person I have coming on today as a guest is someone I've actually wanted to have this type of conversation with for long time. I mean, I'm talking decades. Um, I have known of this individual for several decades, and I have kind of revolved around the things that he has done in close proximity, but never actually met the gentleman. And so today is going to be my distinct honor and my distinct pleasure to have this long, detailed conversation with this person. If you are in the chiropractic world, if you're in the chiropractic community, this should be someone you know very well. This is a person who is widely respected in chiropractic circles and other scientific circles as well. But in chiropractic circles, he is he's one of those larger than life figures that we don't have all that many of anymore in chiropractic. I kind of feel. And I'm really curious to hear what his opinions are going to be on some of the topics that we cover today. This gentleman is a chiropractor and an attorney. He is the co-founder of the Chiropractic Leadership Alliance, or also known as CLA. He's the owner of On Purpose, LLC. He's also the president of the Foundation for Vertebral Subluxation, which is a research branch of chiropractic. This gentleman has worked in the colleges, worked for the colleges, worked for the profession of chiropractic his entire career, which began back in, I think, 1973. We'll have to have him tell us for sure. So this person is, like I said, a wealth of knowledge and very well respected, author of books, textbooks, chapters. And so without further ado, I am going to let into the room here Dr. Christopher Kent. There you
go. I thought they were both on. But anyway, how you doing?
I am doing, I will tell you, because I've got you here in front of me, I'm doing spectacular.
Well, I'm just thrilled that the machinery is working so well.
Well, I'm going to gush over you for a second here. So if you will allow me, okay. I graduated in 2000. I know you graduated in 1973, so you're a little ahead of me. At Cleveland Chiropractic Los Angeles, which is no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there, I was the On Purpose president, chapter president. I was the vice president of the FSCO, among many other things while I was there on the college campus. And you were always someone that I held with deep admiration and respect, and still do. And so having you here on my program is a deep honor and a privilege, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Oh, well, thank you. And I certainly appreciate your efforts at Cleveland College. I've been there many times, and I remember its abrupt closure, which was sad for everyone.
It was, I will tell you that from having been there, of course, it wasn't a complete shock.
Mm.
I don't know if I saw it coming, but it didn't come as a shock either. I wanted to show you this.
Love it.
Blast from the past, cassette tapes. You don't even see those anymore.
Cassette tapes. Most people you're showing that to probably have never seen one and might not even know what it is.
That is probably true. This is the interview with Judy Campanella.
Oh, terrific.
So I had my On Purpose subscription for a long time, and then it went to CDs, and I had it on CD for a long time. When I opened up my first office in the San Francisco East Bay area there in Fremont, California, I would have about an hour drive back and forth from work, and I would listen to those religiously because they filled me up with purpose and kept me focused on, the bigger picture as we try to do. So you have kept my mind in the right frame for quite a while. So I appreciate that presence in my head.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, I've gushed enough. I'm like a fanboy over here. Um, I'm going to have you, if you will, spend a moment and tell the viewers a little bit about your own journey in chiropractic leading up to where we are today. And then we've got lots of things to talk about, but there are going to be people watching who have no clue who you are and are not understanding of why I am a fan.
Mhm.
So give us a little bit about your history. Maybe not just 1973, but what made you decide chiropractic in 1973?
That is kind of an interesting story because I went through a very methodical process in deciding what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that my reason for being, my why, as it were, was empowering individuals to express their potential as human beings on all levels. But I had no idea how to do that. And it was kind of interesting because around that time, my then best friend from college was saying, with some of these health issues you've been discussing with me, you really ought to come and see my chiropractor. And I said, chiropractor, what's that? Because I had been looking at dentistry only because my mother worked at the dental college. And when I was a kid, the dentist was above the bakery. And the bakery used to sell day-old donuts for a nickel. So if I needed some money, I'd go up and visit the dentist and ask him if he had any work for me. And the work was developing his x-rays and cleaning
Oh,
his
wow.
instruments. So I'd go up there, I'd develop his x-rays, I'd clean his instruments, and he'd give me a quarter, and then I was set for a week's worth of donuts. So there was some suggestion that I become a dentist, but just didn't seem like my idea of a good time. Then I read about naturopathy, and that sounded kind of interesting, working with nature, but naturopaths weren't licensed in Wisconsin, and I had assumed that I would go back to my Milwaukee, Wisconsin roots upon graduation. And then I looked at things like podiatry and optometry, and I thought, those people are doing individuals a lot of good, but it seems kind of boring and repetitive. I think I want something else. Well, I finally acquiesced and said, well, okay, I'll go see a chiropractor. And my friend's chiropractor was far, far away. So I said, who's nearby? And as fate would have it, there was a chiropractic office relatively close to my home. It was owned by Russell Earhart, if you remember
I
Earhart,
remember that name. Yes.
X-ray seminar fame. And I thought to myself, how can I find out more about this? Because I had asked my mother. Because, when you're 16-ish, you ask your mother, especially if she works at a university health center. And said, well, what's a chiropractor? Kind of the scowl came over her face as if I had mentioned a sexually transmitted disease or something. And she said, a chiropractor. She said, that's someone who cracks your bones. And I said, wait a minute, cracks your bones? You mean they fracture? And she said, I guess they must. I've seen it done and they snap. And I said, why would anyone in their right mind submit to this? She said, I don't know. I wouldn't go. Ugh. Contradictions.
Auspicious
Contradictions
beginning.
lead to destruction, as we well know. So conflicts clarify.
There you go.
And I called the office and I said that I was doing a paper on chiropractic for school, which was a half lie. I was doing a paper on whatever I wanted to be. I hadn't figured that out yet. And I asked if I could come over and interview the doctor. They said, oh, certainly. Made the appointment. I didn't get Dr. Earhart, but I got Dr. Keith Cronk, who worked in the same office. And he was quite a character. And I came in and he said, okay, start your interview. And I asked him that question that we've all been asked so many times. What is it that chiropractors do? And his response is still one of the most concise and elegant explanations of chiropractic I've ever heard. He said, chiropractic is based on 4 simple concepts. The first is that the body is a self-healing mechanism. Cut your finger, it heals. Cut the finger of a corpse, it doesn't heal. Life is what heals. Sounds good. He said, second, he said, the nervous system is the master and director of all bodily function. Every dimension of the human experience is processed through the nervous system. Every motion, every emotion, every action, every thought, every element of your being is processed through the nervous system. Okay. I remembered hearing that, 4th or 5th grade somewhere. Finally, he said, if there's interference with the function of the nervous system, not only can that compromise your physical well-being, but because it distorts your perception of the world and compromises your ability to respond to the world, it can have significant psycho-emotional consequences too. And when that happens to a significant number of people in a society, you have a sick society. And now I'm just shocked. And he said, in response to your question, what I do as a chiropractor is locate and correct the cause of that interference. It's called vertebral subluxation.
Bam.
Bam is right. So to make a long story short, I became his patient. And if we go back even before that, a person who was very instrumental in raising me was my grandmother, because both of my parents worked. And she was a Christian Scientist. So to her, chiropractic was pretty radical stuff. So I kind of came from the opposite end of the spectrum rather than someone who was, as BJ used to like to say, born in a medicine cabinet. I certainly wasn't that. So to make a long story short, I started seeing him. All kinds of stuff went away. I felt better than I had in a long time. And what really impressed me is that things were improving that I hadn't ever mentioned. I said, do you think it's possible that this? Well, of course. Well, what about this? Well, of course. More energy, more clarity. Just the world looks better. Yeah. Yep. It's very matter of fact. So after a few months of this, and again, I'm still going through my process of what am I going to do with my life? And I was kind of leaning toward psychology. I thought, I don't know if I really have a future as a couch jockey. And you can really not see very many people and give them what they need, valuable as it may be. And I was thinking about what he said over and over and over. And after about 2 months into care, he looked at me and said, look, why don't you become a chiropractor yourself? I thought to myself, okay, what does that entail? And he said, well, you need 2 years of pre-professional school. And I said, well, in what? And he said, basically 60 credits of almost anything. And I said, okay, I've got that. And he said, let me make a phone call. And he came back and he's holding the phone to his ear. This was when phones had wires. And we weren't
Sure.
that old. Yeah. He's holding the phone to his ear. He's got his hand over the mouthpiece and he says, they got a class starting next month. Why don't you go? And I said, you think I could get in? He said, you can get in. And he talked to the guy. He said, yeah. He said, they got an opening. You can get in. Why don't you go? I said, okay. And it was one of those things that just seemed naturally right. I didn't question it. I just said, okay. So I remember packing all my belongings in some cardboard boxes and heading to Davenport with my mother. And I'll never forget what she said when we arrived and she saw the place, which did not have the elegant campus that they do today. Um, no air conditioning in July of 1970.
Oof.
Yeah. And students wearing, in some cases, suits and ties, and others clinic jackets, sitting in these classrooms with fans that went about a quarter RPM, barely turning to move the air, supposedly. And then we went to see the dorm rooms. And you had to stay in the dorm until you were 21 or entered clinic. We're looking at the dorm. And my mother turned to me and said, if this is the largest and the finest, I'd hate to see the smallest and the worst. And she said, okay. I said, what do you mean, okay? And she said, well, you're not going to stay now that you've seen it, are you? And I said, well, of course. She said, okay. And that's kind of how it all began.
Wow. Auspicious beginning, to say the
Yes,
least.
yes. And that chain of, well, of course, the next step that was never questioned kind of followed me throughout my career. And one of the things that they had going was a dress code and a grooming code. And they had what they called the Dress and Groom Committee, which we used to call the Stress and Gloom Committee, because if they subpoenaed you, you had to show up and then they would see if you were in compliance. And the bottom of your hair couldn't fall below around C6. And when I entered the clinic, I thought, well, I'll meet them halfway. I understand them not wanting us to look, too shabby when we're seeing outpatients. So I got a wig and I stuffed my hair under the wig.
Did you have long hair then?
I was down to about T2, T3.
Oh,
Yeah.
check you out. I would love to see a picture of that.
Oh, it's available. In fact, somewhere there was a picture in the Davenport Times of me holding my wig in one hand and with my long hair, and a picture of BJ with his long hair next to it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. It was quite a roller coaster ride. And I was adjusting a patient on a Thompson drop table, and my wig fell off onto the patient. So that was the end of my cover. Someone turned me in, and they said, if you don't cut your hair, well, we'll have to dismiss you. And I said, well, if you do that, I'll have to consult an attorney and consider legal action. So both of us did. And I went to see an attorney, a really bright guy. And he said, sure, I'll take your case. He was relatively young and just getting started in practice. And he read the rules and he looked at me and he said, there's some people there with longer hair than yours. And I said, oh. And he said, the women. He said, sexual discrimination is prohibited. So he filed a complaint. And basically what we said is if I had chopped my hair there, so did the women. And it went back and forth and back and forth and
Oh,
all
wow.
kinds of publicity, as I said. And finally, we settled the case. I told them that if they would let me back in, um, if there was any monetary settlement, I would give it to whatever schools didn't have such a limitation. So,
You were quite the rebel rouser.
oh yeah. So we settled. I'm just getting warmed up. So we settled. I returned and I joined the faculty. because I thought to myself, if there is any way that I can reach more people than I can adjusting my community, maybe it's helping to produce more chiropractors.
The fact that they actually asked you to be part of the faculty after all the lawsuit was an interesting choice.
Well, the interesting thing is all of these people liked me and I liked them, and we had worked together because I worked in the curriculum center, printing notes and exams and things. I did all the audiovisual stuff for them. That was kind of my work study gig. And I knew them. We liked each other. We did each other favors, and it was kind of a painful process for everyone involved. But then a significant event happened. The Council on Chiropractic Education became recognized as an accreditor,
CCE,
by the federal government. And at that time, there could only be one programmatic accreditor. And the way that that happened was quite dodgy. The ACA group, which at that time represented only a minority of students in colleges.
American Chiropractic Association, for those who don't know. Yes.
And the ICA, the International Chiropractors Association,
the two rival organizations.
The overwhelming majority of chiropractic students in their schools were vying for recognition from the Department of Ed. And finally they said, hey, you people have to get together because we can have only one programmatic accreditor per a given profession. And they agreed to binding arbitration. Well, basically the ACA reneged on the deal, and they submitted their app, and it went through, and voila, CCE was it. And they took it upon themselves to say that we are going to attempt to make CCE accreditation a requirement for admission to practice in all jurisdictions in the United States. And they said, if we can do it by statute, that's best because they're difficult to modify. If the only way we can do it is by rules and regulations, we'll settle for that. But bottom line is, no CCE stamp of approval, no admission to licensure.
Change the face of chiropractic.
Change the face of chiropractic, because CCE at that time said, our objective, and they at that time actually required that this be part of the mission statement of a school, is to prepare, as they put it, I'll never forget the phrase, distinctive primary care physicians. So that's the way that all began. And about this same time, professional associations began lobbying for insurance equality laws, which provided that, if you pay anybody, you have to pay everybody. And this led to a radical change in the profession.
So we're talking late 70s, early 80s at this point?
Yeah. Well, mid 70s.
Mid 70s?
Mid 70s or so. And once again, here I am teaching at Palmer, and I was just livid. And one day I was called before the executive committee, and I was a member of it because I was president of the faculty senate at the time. And I just thought it was a routine meeting. And I walked into the room, I just felt this vibe that sucked the energy out of me. And these guys are just looking at me. None of the small talk that had characterized most of our previous meetings. So Dr. Price, who was then dean of faculty, said, would you like to begin? Now I'm truly befuddled. And he said, he's looking at his thing, and he said, on such and such a date at such and such a time in your microbiology class, did you state that CCE was a pathology? They'd ask about pathology, and CCE is an example of a pathology, things like that. In your spinal anatomy class on such and such a date, did you say blah, blah, blah? In your x-ray class on such and such a date on such and such a time, did you say that? I said, wait a minute. I said, let's save ourselves some time here. I don't recall the exact wording, but I'm willing to stipulate that those statements are representative and accurately reflect my opinion of the organization, and that I have shared this with students. Now they looked pretty shocked, and they said, well, you can't do that. And then I recall Dr. Price said, I'll never forget this. He said, well, you say that you're opposed to chiropractors engaging in the diagnosis and treatment of conditions, he said. Don't you believe that finding a vertebral subluxation is a form of diagnosis? And I just looked him dead in the eye and I said, that's not what you taught me, Dr. Price. And he said, well, don't you believe that a chiropractic adjustment is just another form of treatment? Said the same thing. He just put his head down. And I said, tell you what, maybe we can compromise. I will not initiate a conversation about this, but if asked, will reply honestly. And they basically said, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. Because at that time, CCE also required that institutions provide, and I'll never forget this phrase either, loyalty, advocacy, and support. Loyalty, advocacy, and support. In other words, you couldn't say we're doing this because they're holding a gun to our head and we got to get our people licensed. Can't do that. You got to say, this is wonderful, we love it, we agree with it. And I said, I just can't make that work.
Toe the line.
And then I said, do you want me to resign? And they said, well, we're not asking you to resign. I said, well, clearly that's where this is headed. If that's what you want, that's what I'll do. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Had a small practice in Davenport at the time, but I didn't know. And suddenly they said, are you willing to sign a statement that you're voluntarily resigning? I said, sure, I'll do that. So I did. And a couple days later, and this is in all the publications at the school, and quite a bit of brouhaha's going on. And I got a call from a guy named Reggie Gold, who I had met years later. And I like to tell people that Reggie Gold is the one who's responsible for whatever I am today. I mean, I could have had an easy life. I could be practicing in Milwaukee, seeing people who think I'm the wonderful thing and having a great time and maybe having a nice family life. And, who knows? But no, I met this guy named Reggie who spoke to a group of us students at the 75th anniversary of chiropractic. And I remember he talked until they basically said, we got to close the building. And then he came over to a building across the street and we came with him. And I was sitting on a step, on a staircase. And Reggie Gold was talking and he said, if you were the last chiropractor on
earth,
would chiropractic survive?
One of his most famous speeches, yes.
And I bought into it.
Oh, yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker. And fast forward to now, I've just resigned from Palmer. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But Reggie had heard of it. Reggie called me up And he said, "This is Reggie Gold." I said, "Yes." He says, "I understand you might be available for employment." Yes. And he said, "I am currently the president of the Adio Institute of Straight Chiropractic." And he said, "We need a second school so that we can qualify for student loans and so forth.
Wow.
And I like to start schools, but I don't really like to run them." He said, "And my feeling is that if you would join us now as academic dean, it wouldn't be long before you would be ready to become president."
Can I interject something here? And I
Yeah.
want you to tell me if this analogy seems fitting to you. So once again, as a clarification for all of you watching, ADIO was ADIO, above, down, inside out was the
Yes.
principle. And
Yes.
this new chiropractic college that was going to be started, I likened it because I love the history of this.
Mhm.
It's kind of like back in like the late 60s, early 70s when hippies would take over something. You'd see all
Sure.
the long-haired hippies and
Yeah.
tie-dye, and they'd take over a government building and do a sing-in and everything. You
Yeah.
guys were the long-haired hippies taking over an institution and making something because this was very radical.
Oh, it was very radical. In Sherman College, which was founded in 1973, and of course was the first school. Um, and I wasn't there at the time, of course, but the people I talked to who were said, there were the hippies and there were the veterans, and two very different cohorts, but they somehow managed to develop synergy to
Yeah.
develop the school and to work together. So anyway, Reggie, and I learned why soon, said, "Well, you're in Davenport." He said, I'm in Pennsylvania here." He said, "Why don't we meet in the middle in Chicago? That'd be an easy place for us to meet, talk about it there." So showed up in Chicago. He talked to me, I talked to him. We both said, okay, shook hands. And next thing you know, I'm packing to go there.
Wow.
If you think my arrival at Palmer was a shock, Adio at that time was housed in an elementary school that they had um, rented or leased. And you go in, and first of all, it was in rather nasty repair. The ceiling tiles, if they weren't actually ready to fall or had fallen, were marked with water stains. Um, the urinals and drinking fountains were for, you know, K through 6 or whatever they had. And I'm just looking around.
What have I gotten myself into?
What have I got myself into? And they have all these books piled up. Um, how to repair transistor radios, or, Beckett, or, whatever. I mean, not relevant to anything. And in those days, you could qualify for student loans if you got 3 traditionally accredited schools to accept your transfer credits. So part of my job was to try and peddle our credits to 3 schools that would go along with this. But you had to have X number of volumes in the library, and they didn't specify what they had to be. So Reggie had book drives. He said, to the local chiropractors and anyone else, bring us your books. So, here's this library full of this bizarre current collection of books. You know, the thing that kind of shocked me, maybe more than anything else, was the wooden X-ray machine. Now they had a mock-up of an X-ray machine that students could use to practice their setups. Now, in their clinic, which was actually rather nice, they had a real X-ray machine, of course, but they didn't have one at the college for people to practice setups on. So they had this wooden X-ray
So
machine.
it's like a mock.
Yeah, it was a mock-up. And
Interesting.
but that's what they had. And I'm just, I'm kind of taken aback by the whole scene. And I remember going in one morning and Reggie said, I have a question for you. He said, I've been talking with the people at the state, the Department of Education. He said, uh, people that allow us to have a school. He said, do you have all that medical stuff? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, at Palmer, he said, you guys use the ophthalmoscope and the otoscope and the sphygmomanometer and all that stuff. He says, do you have that? I said, yeah, I have that. And he smiled and he said to his secretary, you can call the state and tell them that we now have a physiology and diagnosis laboratory.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's classic. That is
So
classic.
that was classic Reggie.
Oh my
And
gosh.
wow. Well, pretty soon things started to heat up a bit at ADIO. And Reggie was kind of fed up with trying to make this happen. And he came up with an idea. And that idea was to start a new profession.
I remember this.
And that was a profession called spinology.
Biology.
So he left ADIO and he started what he called the Philadelphia Spinal Tutorium, which offered a one academic year course, 9 months, to become a certified spinologist. And he said, we'll teach philosophy, we'll teach technique. He let me teach what little basic science he would allow them to have, mostly spinal anatomy, because he said, I don't want you and Irene giving them all this minutia, just producing spinologists here. Yeah. Okay.
So had you left? So did ADIO close at that point, or
No,
was it
ADIO
still?
was still open. Joe Strauss took over as president. Reggie left, started spinology. I went
And
with
you went with?
Reggie. I
Wow.
went with Reggie. And his idea was to create a religion because he had looked at Christian Science and some of their legal issues. And he said, it worked for them. Maybe we can do this. So we started the Triune of Life Church. And I was the principal elder of the Triune of Life Church.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yes. And Reggie was president of the Philadelphia Spinal Tutorium, head of the school, or whatever title he used. I'm not sure of the title. And lo and behold, we started the spinology thing. And what happened next was kind of interesting because Reggie had said, pulled me aside, and he said, don't give up your chiropractic license. You can not renew it and get it back, but don't give it up. Okay. He says, we're really not sure what's going to happen. So in California, there was a case involving spinology where the very people that were attacking Reggie were now attacking spinology. And here's what kind of messed it up. The people who had become spinologists were, for the most part, former chiropractors. And the practice members weren't aware of the fact that this was a church. Some of them weren't anyway. And one of the chiropractors was asked, well, is spinology a religion? And said no. So basically, we had an adverse decision there, an adverse court action. And that was kind of the end of spinology in the United States. Meanwhile, Enrique, opened a spinal tutorium in Spain, which is still operational, by the way, and
Really?
is now teaching spinology in a variety of places. It's really
Interesting.
kind of cool that it's still alive and well, just not in the United States.
I had no idea that it was still a
Yeah, we
functional
still keep
thing.
in touch a little
Wow.
bit. Yeah, we still keep in touch.
Interesting.
Yeah. So now what am I going to do? Well, Irene Gold hired me to teach a board review.
And
And
Irene Gold, for everybody who doesn't know, is Reggie's
was
wife
Reggie's wife, who was a nurse before she became a chiropractor.
and became very famous and financially stable through giving board review examinations, which I took myself. Yes.
Right, right. In other words, she offered courses to prepare you for the various parts of the national and state board exams.
The stuff that Reggie was actually against.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting dynamic there.
The whole I couldn't. Wow. Yeah. So, so I'm working for Irene, and I'm watching their dogs while they're going away and things like that. And um, we she had me go to I think it was Atlanta to do a board review class. And who was in the board review class but a guy named Patrick Gentempo?
I was just going to ask you, when did you meet Patrick Gentempo? There you go.
Patrick Gentempo came up to me at the first break and he said, "Do you own this business?" And I said, "No, I work for Irene." And he said, "Does she pay you a percentage?" And I said, "Well, she pays me a flat rate." And he said, "Why don't you start your own business?" And I said, "I don't have a business head, and, I'm okay with what I'm doing with Irene." He said, "Let's talk." So we had lunch, and he said, "Let's start our own board review business."
When was this?
1983, 84.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we did. And we came up with kind of a revolutionary idea, and that was to offer a money-back guarantee. People said, "Well, how can you possibly offer a money-back guarantee?" And I said, "Well, it's really pretty simple. We'll just withhold whatever the percentage of people who pass and fail is. We'll figure out the failure rate at each site, and that's readily available, and we'll just put that money away until the results are out. And if we have no effect, we haven't lost anything. And if we have a positive effect, there'll be far fewer people seeking refunds and we'll be okay." So that's how that started. And from there, I had been doing some work at Palmer West because I got a call from Dr. Miller, who was then president, who invited me to come out there after I had a stroke. And one day, what had happened was I was visiting Patrick's family, staying there, turned my head to one side. My right SCN became rock hard.
Oh, wow.
The room started spinning. I tried to get up. I started to stumble. Patrick's father saw me, immediately called 911. He said, "I think you're having a stroke." And next thing I know, I'm waking up in the hospital, laying on a gurney with an ER doc looking down upon me saying, "We're not sure what's wrong, but we've called a neurologist. He should be here shortly." So the neurologist came in and he looked at me, said, "All right," he said, "I'm not a cop. Whatever you tell me is confidential." This was when cocaine was very popular. He said,
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
"Have you had any cocaine?" I said, "No." He said, "Have you had any other drugs? Have you had any amphetamines, any stimulants, anything that would cause elevated blood pressure?" I said, "No." And he said, and he kept repeating, "Whatever you tell me is confidential." And then he said, "Look, I need to know. We could injure you if we do the wrong thing. I've got to know." And I said, "No, I haven't taken any drugs whatsoever." And I told him, I said, "I'm a chiropractor. I don't take drugs." So he ordered all these labs. And I remember he came back in the room and he looked astonished, and he said, "You're completely clean." He said, "There are no drugs in your bloodstream." I said, "Of course not." He said, "But there is this, this, and this." He said, looks like there's something serious going on. He said, "I want to do what in those days was a digital subtraction angiography thing." And I said, "What does that entail?" And he said, "Well, injection of a radiopaque dye." And I said, "You really think that's necessary?" And he said, "All four limbs are paralyzed, and we're having to periodically assist your breathing. How much worse does it have to get?" And I said, "Okay." So he did it. He said, "That's all negative. We don't know what's going on. They're doing more tests." And he thought I was going to die. So he had called my parents and said, "If you expect to see him before he passes, you better get here." So we don't know how long he's going to last. Probably not more than a couple days, maybe a week. And one of the people who came to see me was one of these wonderful old-time chiropractors who was as on fire with chiropractic that day as he was the day he walked across the stage in his class. And we had studied radiology together, and he had said to me, "What's going on?" And I said, "How did you get in here?" They said it was for immediate family only. And he smiled and he pulled out a badge. He said, he said, "I got a friend in the police department who gave me a badge that said I'm a police surgeon." So I showed him the badge and I said, "I need to do an exam, make sure there's no foul play." And they said, "Come right in." And he sent them out. And he turned to me and he said, "How about an adjustment?" And I thought to myself, the worst thing you can do at this point is induce unconsciousness. And at this point, that would be welcome compared to what I'm feeling, because there is no worse feeling I've ever experienced than not being able to breathe. That's got to be worse than any level of pain I've ever suffered.
Yeah, no doubt.
So turned me over onto my side, pulled off one of the EKG leads by accident. An alarm went off. These nurses came in. And he said, "It's fine. Sorry about the lead. I'll refix it." He sent him out, set up on my atlas, delivered a thrust. Sounded like the report of a starter's pistol. I never heard it sound like that emitted from a human being. And he said, "Okay, that's it." And I thought to myself, he came up with the same diagnosis as the neurologist from the med school. He said, "You don't look so good. I don't know what to do." Well, how about an adjustment? So the next day I was able to wiggle the fingers on my hand. Shortly thereafter, I didn't need any assisted ventilation. The neurologist came back and he said, "It looks like you're going to make it, but you may be incontinent and you may be confined to a wheelchair." And I said, "Nah,
No,
we got to do better than that." And he said, "Well, I can get you into a rehab hospital." So I got into the rehab hospital, and most people did an hour of physical therapy and an hour of occupational therapy and spent the rest of their time vegetating in bed. And I said, "Can I do more?" He said, "You can do as much as you want." I said, "So I can alternate between the two and just keep going as long as you're open until I need a rest?" They said, "Sure." So I did. And, they carried me in, and I walked out with a cane, albeit, a quad cane, with more function than most people who had been there for months.
wow.
And it was at that time that I had what Jack Boyle likes to call my conviction, because I never had any doubt about the value of chiropractic. I never had any doubt about my ability to deliver it. I never had any artificial limitations imposed upon what I thought was the capability of the human body and the human spirit. But I hadn't experienced it at that level myself. And it was at that point I said, I will never sell this idea out for the episodic symptomatic treatment of musculoskeletal pain syndromes or the practice of primary care medicine. Chiropractic is about life. Chiropractic is bigger than that. And I thought, at that time, I also realized that there was nothing that I could do for a human being, later expanded that to animals, by the way, that could improve the quality of their humanity on as many levels, as quickly, as safely, and effectively as a chiropractic adjustment.
Yeah.
And while other things might have value, if my goal as a human being was to facilitate the expression of potential in others, yeah, I'm still there. You know, show me something better.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm looking. I'm open to it. You show me something I can do to someone else that will improve their life on as many levels, as quickly, effectively, methodically, safely, predictably as a chiropractic adjustment. Just haven't found it.
Amazing. I never heard that story before. I've heard a lot of things about your past, but I've never
Not
heard that
many
story.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, not many have. Trying to give you some original material. Some people have heard bits and pieces.
So after that happened, I'm assuming you still had your association, your relationship with Chintempo, and
Yeah, we came up with, well, while I had been at Palmer West, I had been working with some neuropsychology people who were using surface electromyography.
yeah,
And they had been working with some chiropractors, kind of informally, and said, this is kind of interesting. You people use palpation to assess muscle tone. What if we could quantify it? That sounds groovy. So I became very interested in that. And at that point, I still thought, I don't know how much time I have left on the planet. And I thought I had to make productive use of every moment. So on the tank of the toilet, I had Dorland's dictionary and the Merck manual. And while I was attending to biological necessities, I would thumb through them and just kind of, read something. And one day I opened Dorland's to a page. And again, for people who say there are no coincidences, how likely is this to have happened? And in that issue of Dorland's, they defined the term dysphonesis.
I've heard you use that a million times. Yes.
And I said, this is pretty amazing because it's not an itis, it's not an osis, it's a dys. There's potentially a qualitative and a quantitative component to it. And I thought of BJ's writings about qualitative and quantitative survival value. And ponos means work, toil, or exertion. I said, energy. And I read the definition where it talked about covert, meaning asymptomatic, errors in energy expenditure, which affected all these things in the nervous system. And I said, this is it. And that's when I think Patrick and I published one of our first papers called Chiropractic in a Word, Dysphonesis. Well, back in those days, the only way you could access the National Library of Medicine, or PubMed, was the only publicly offered service that I was aware of was through Beth Israel Hospital. So you would dial up Beth Israel Hospital on your Commodore 64 if anyone remembers that. And 300 baud modem, folks. And you'd put your query in, and you'd go to bed, and it would grind all night, and you didn't know what you'd end up with in the morning. All of your fanfold dot matrix printer paper might have been consumed, or you might have just had a couple lines. And I thought, an idea this profound has to have more. And there was only one paper published on dyskinesis.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about it was that the people who published the paper were mental health professionals. And what they had said was, there are postural and gait changes that we consistently see that are associated with certain mental health disorders. Maybe we can use this to objectively identify them. Well, how interesting. So we were working with some engineers at the time, and I asked one of them, I said, have you ever heard of dyskinesis? And kind of this half smile came across his face, and he said, yes, of course. Some biofeedback people were into that. And I asked him about the paper by Whatmore and Coley, and whatever happened to this elegant concept that they came up with relating to mental health. And he said, it had its 15 minutes of fame and then just kind of faded away. And I said, why did it fade away? And he said, because psychotropic drugs and psychotherapy did not change dyskinetic patterns.
Now, just for the sake of those who don't understand, dyskinesis, my understanding of it is a dysfunctional use of energy in the body, essentially.
Yes. And the cool thing about it is that when we're looking at dyskinesis, if we're looking at the efferent brain cell to tissue cell side of the safety pin cycle, dyskinesis relates to tonic muscle activity. So why are we both sitting here? Why aren't we, quivering lumps of fibrillating protoplasm? Well, it's because the intelligence in our body is taking all this postural information, all this stuff from the internal and external environment, and integrated it, everything from how much pressure is on your ischial tuberosity to what's happening to your paraspinal muscles to what's happening to those tiny little muscles in the upper cervical spine that are so small. As one surgeon said to me, there's those little things we just take out of the way when we're doing a fusion. All of these things that are giving the central nervous system information concerning the position and the motion of our spine in the moment. Paraspinal muscle activity that is involuntary.
Yes.
That's dyskinesis.
Proprioceptive input.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, any kind of mechanoreceptive input, and others too, probably, which is a whole nother story. Maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't.
Have to do a second part to this.
Yes. Then there's dyskinesia.
Exactly, yes.
And dyskinesia refers to voluntary motion. And where is voluntary motion a very big deal? In sports. And this is why virtually all major sports teams have chiropractors on staff. If you remember from the old days, one of the spokespeople for the Chiropractic Leadership Alliance, which was the group that Patrick and I created, was Dan O'Brien.
I remember that. Yeah.
And Dan O'Brien was, he was on boxes of Wheaties. He was this multi-gold medal champion.
World's top athlete.
world's top athlete.
Yeah.
And he said, if it weren't for chiropractic, I wouldn't have won the gold medal.
Yeah.
Why? Because he needed an orthopedic surgeon? No, he already had the best. Because he needed an athletic trainer? No, he already had the best. Because he needed a physical therapist? No, he already had the best. Because he needed to perform at his peak. If there was a disconnect between what he wanted his body to do and what his body could do, that could create a problem. And it's when you're looking at fractions of a second, and
Yes.
you're looking at performance, that we see the potential that chiropractic has. And then, of course, the third part um, was dysautonomia, or autonomic tone dysfunction. And we had to differentiate between the hereditary type, which we see in Ashkenazi Jews, for example, and other groups, and the acquired type, which we saw that's associated with vertebral subluxation. So we came up with the three-dimensional model, as we called it. And we said, if we can create instrumentation that any chiropractor can use regardless of technique, that looks at these various dimensions of nerve function and how they are qualitatively and quantitatively compromised, and how they can improve the practice of whatever technique they use by monitoring this stuff. How cool that would be. And that's
Cool
what gave
indeed.
birth to the Insight Subluxation Station.
Cool indeed.
And then we added the fourth dimension, disafferentation, which looked at the tissue cell to brain cell leg and how that related to the whole process. And we came up with the 4D model. And back in those days, many chiropractors, particularly those who focused on vertebral subluxation, were kind of by themselves.
Hey there. I wanted to take a second to thank you for tuning into these episodes. And I also wanted to ask if you would take a moment and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, subscribe to these services. And I wanted to also show you my website. Now, granted, this website is still under construction, but you can find my link tree here on this website. And with this link tree, you can go to everything that I do. You've got YouTube, Spotify, Rumble. You've got my Substack writings if you want to read those, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Please follow me on all these different platforms and subscribe to, once again, YouTube, etc. This really helps to support the things that I do and allows me to continue doing these things. So if you feel like you're getting a lot out of these, which I hope you do, because I know I do, please take a moment to do those things. And once again, I appreciate you. I'll see you on the flip side.
So we said we have to create not only an instrument, but a training program for how to use that instrument and integrate it with our philosophy, science, and art. And the Total Solution Seminar was born.
Go to the mountain.
Go to the mountain in Colorado Springs,
I was there.
where we had a ropes course where
Oh, yeah.
in the early days we went to an observatory and actually looked into outer space and
Ah, I didn't get that.
contemplated all of that. Yeah, there was a lot of cool stuff that we did.
Yeah, I still have my original Insight Subluxation Station, and it
Yeah,
works perfectly well. I still use that for EMG and the thermography and the range of motion. I do not have heart rate variability, which I should have, but I do have the three. And I went to the top of the mountain. I did the whole experience.
yeah.
So yeah.
So why did we create?
Incredible.
Why did we create on purpose? To maintain a connection.
Yeah.
Because, you know, how can we connect between seminars, where we can't expect you to come to Total Solution over and over, though some people did.
Yeah.
But we needed a way to create a family, a community of like-minded chiropractors And that was the idea. We one of our trademarked bits was carpool with some of the greatest minds in chiropractic, because we'd always have guests as well as ourselves. And that was the idea. Make productive use of that drive time to and from your office, because you're going to be sitting in the car anyway. Why not use it to get excited, to get connected, and to learn stuff that you can employ immediately? And that kind of gave birth to that. And the other tagline we used was, when you're on purpose, you're not alone, which we still
Absolutely.
do.
And
So that's
it's
how that all began.
and the on purpose is still going. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's still
On
running. Yeah.
purpose is
Yeah.
alive and well
That's what I
for
thought.
decades.
Yeah. I,
Patrick did it until a few years ago. Now we have Matt McCoy as the co-host,
yes, that's
because
right.
Patrick is going into other directions.
Filming things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Film production things, making documentary
Yeah. I
movies.
have his vaccine documentary. We
Yeah,
purchased that.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So now Matt is the co-host, and we're still going strong after all these years. And,
Yeah.
when will it stop? I don't know. So,
Hopefully never, right? Yeah.
well, we had another bit of a challenge, and that was one day I fell in the bathtub and split my head open, and the person that co-owns the house I'm living in thankfully called 911, and one of them said, one of the EMTs or whatever, said, well, do you just want us to help you put him in bed and put a bandage on his head? He's not bleeding too badly. It'll probably stop. She said, I paused for a moment. I thought what you had said once was, if anything questionable happens, call 911. And she did, but she said, something in me said, I think you better take him to the hospital and have him looked at, have him checked out. And they did so. And I remember waking up, laying in this hospital bed with this doctor looking over me, and it was like deja vu all over again with the stroke,
Yeah.
only decades later. And he looked at me and he said, you've just had a heart attack. He said, I've called in a heart surgeon. We might want to consider bypass surgery. And I just, wait a minute. I said, I had even thought to myself, if it ever comes to that, I don't think I'm going to consent to that. But he brought the guy in, and they did their cardiac catheterization thing, their imaging study, and the surgeon said, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. He said, the vessels are too deteriorated. We can't do it. And the cardiologist turned to me and he said, what we can do is what he called a high-risk PCI, we're going to go and in your groin, and we're going to insert a catheter, and we're going to worm that into your coronary arteries and dilate them and shoot some stuff in there and open them up. How does that sound? Well, I don't know. Better than being dead, I guess. But I asked him a question. This was very telling. I said, if I have these blockages, why am I not dead? The myocardium is somehow being perfused. And he said, well, of course, there's collateral circulation. He said, but yours is severely compromised. I don't know how long that'll sustain you. So anyway, I let him do his thing. And
Better than
woke
cracking
up.
your ribs open.
No, woke
Yeah.
up, and, there he is again. And he said, well, we completed the procedure, but there are some problems. He said, you've got E. coli bacteremia. I said, well, that doesn't sound like a good time. And he said, it isn't. Um, and he's talking about all kinds of radical stuff, implanting a defibrillator converter and all of this stuff. And saying, wait a minute, let's see what happens here. So I'm in the hospital for a week. I lost 5 hours of my life. I didn't remember anything that happened in the ER. And I read the record, and they said, you know, uh, patient, was an affable man. We described what we were planning to do. He understood. He consented. We did these CT scans. We did this. We did that. Blah blah blah. I don't remember any of that. There's just 5 years or 5 hours rather,
Yeah.
that's gone. Which I hope 5 years from now will come back. But anyway, once again, I'd kind of had enough. And when the infection had subsided, um, he said, well, you can remain here for some rehab and so forth. And I said, well, is there anything you can do here that I can't do at home? And he said, well, no, not really. I said, okay, let's go. So I went home, same story. And the one thing he admonished, he said, you've got to exercise, and then we'll see what happens. So I got an exercise bike. It's in the blurred background there. I have another one at home. I do 3 miles a day. And when I went back for my first checkup after the hospitalization thing, the nurse practitioner said, well, we're going to do an ultrasound. We're going to do an echocardiogram and measure your ejection fraction, see what it is. And when it was done, he looked at me kind of shocked, and he said, it does fall within normal range. And I said, so we're not going to do the cardioverter or anything? He said, no, of course not necessary. And he said, but you do need to take some medications and blah, blah, blah. So I did that for a while. And then I thought to myself, I got to get off these drugs, because he had dropped my blood pressure to like 90/60, and I was testifying before state board, and I'm spinning. I can't read my own notes. I'm seeing these flashing colors, and I'm trying to make my mouth work so that something came out. And I said, I can't operate this way. So I said, well, you can try discontinuing this. Then he said, well, you can discontinue this too. And then you can discontinue that. And we finally reached the point where the only thing he wanted me to keep taking was the statin. And I just quit that. So I quit all the heart drugs, and I'm still here. And I got a lab report, and it looks pretty good. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're still here.
So I'm still happy. And Peggy, who's my friend with I go in the house with, said, well, you took drugs and you had all these interventions and so forth. And I said, yeah, that was an emergent condition. And now that that's subsided, I'm going back to my philosophy and trying to get off of this stuff. And as I said, now I have. So yeah, I'm still here. As I said to someone, if a cat has 9 lives, I don't know, I'm probably down to 2 or 3, but still going.
Well,
The good news is I lost 45 pounds. So
yeah, you look thinner than the last time I saw you.
yeah, I had gained all this weight when I was studying law. And
when did you get that? When did you get your law degree?
oh, well, that's kind of wild. That's when, I kind of skipped over that piece. For a while in New Jersey, while Patrick and I were doing our CLA stuff, I became an NGO representative to the UN, NGO being a non-governmental organization. And I was in the right place at the right time when they were looking for a treasurer for the executive committee, because the existing one had just passed away and nobody wanted the job. And they said, will you take it? I said, okay, I'll take it. Well, next thing I know, I'm chair of the health committee, the NGO health committee at the UN, and all kinds of opportunities came up, and I really learned a little bit about diplomacy. I was never a great fan of where they were politically, especially when it came to UNICEF, because UNICEF, of course, was heavily promoting vaccination as being a primary strategy.
Absolutely.
And I remember we were talking about how there was a program coming up for the NGOs on women's health. And they said, well, UNICEF wants to talk about women's health and vaccination. And I said, they're always coming here talking about vaccination. Why don't we do something different? Different? Yeah. I said, how about a program on chiropractic and women's health? And by the way, in the background, I had loaded up the executive committee with a representative from the Confederation of Midwives, with a medical doctor whose job was to convince medical doctors to prescribe fewer antibiotics. He was in charge of what they called antibiotic stewardship. So anyway, a clinical psychologist. So I had them loaded up with all of these people, and they thought that was a really cool idea. And I went to the UNICEF guy one day, and I said, I've got a question for you. And he said, what's that? I said, how do you do informed consent? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, how do you explain to the parents of the children you're going to vaccinate what the benefits and risks are and what potential adverse consequences there may be and what alternatives there may be? And he looked at me as if I was from outer space, and he said, we never do that.
Of course not.
And I said, why not? He said, no one would get vaccines if we did that.
Boom. Yep.
Boom. And I mean, I think I still have a scar on my tongue from where I bit it, because that's probably the closest I've ever come to throwing furniture through a plate glass window. But it was that point when I got back, I said to myself, we're going to find alternatives to UNICEF. And lo and we did, because they had a program in Seoul, Korea, and Ralph Boone at that point was president of the New Zealand College, and Ralph and I had always worked together on a lot of activities. He was also president of the chiropractic college in California that was the straight school. And I said, hey, want to go to Seoul, Korea? He said, sure. And I said, cool. So that was our presentation there, about chiropractic. But if I'm to be brutally honest with myself, that all sounds groovy, but if I'm going to be honest with myself, did it have any long-term impact? Of course not.
No.
They're back vaccinated.
Yeah.
Didn't change anything. The health committee, gone away with COVID. And yikes.
So you were telling me about jurisprudence, about
law, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you know about the World Federation of Chiropractic,
Indeed,
you know that this is an organization that wants to control chiropractic worldwide. And they believe that vertebral subluxation should only be discussed in a historical context, and certainly not as a real thing. They're members of organizations that have adopted policies and regulatory bodies like the General Chiropractic Council that say there's no evidence to support its existence. So that's about as bad as it gets. Well, their former Secretary General was David Chapman Smith, an attorney from Toronto. If you remember,
I remember
David.
him. Indeed.
And I was on an airplane flying to an event where there was going to be a debate. And they thought, this is going to be wonderful. And as fate would have it, again, talk about no coincidences. There was an actual print magazine. Back then, airlines had print magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And, not just monitors. Well, they didn't have a monitor in the seat. They had print magazines. So I was reading a print magazine that had an article on how patients perceive attorneys. And it was scathing. It talked about how uh, they were close to used car dealers and trustworthiness, that people thought they were unscrupulous, that they did not maintain good communications, that they, just all this nasty stuff about attorneys. And I said, this is going to come in useful someday. So I kept it. I didn't realize how soon that day was going to be. So David Chapman Smith got up and he gave his anti-subluxation spiel. And he said, in Toronto, he said, we tried a public relations campaign on vertebral subluxation and it failed. People said that they either didn't accept the concept or they felt it should be done by medical practitioners, not chiropractors. He said, and as a result of that failure, we know that we can't sell vertebral subluxation. And then he said the words that changed the whole narrative. He said, we have to become what the public perceives us as being. And that's a treater of musculoskeletal pain. I opened my magazine. I said, David, you're suggesting that a profession should become what the public perceives it as being? He said, absolutely. And then I started reading excerpts from the article. When I was finished, I said, so David, is that what you feel the legal profession should aspire to become? And he gave me this pseudo smile and said, you should become an attorney. I thought,
Why
yeah,
not?
why not? So again, I got into this very innovative program from British American University, which no longer exists because, to make a long story short, the attrition was so high that although they had provisional approval for access to the bar exam, not enough people completed the program to sustain it. So yeah, unfortunately, they turned it down. But the bottom line is, um, I said, yeah, maybe I should become an attorney. And you know what pushed me over the edge? I'm dating myself here. The movie My Cousin Vinny, if any of you
Oh, I
remember
love that.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was one of my, that
Marissa
sealed the
Tomei.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that sealed the deal for me. Um, so why did I become an attorney? Um, at that point, I said, to create an opportunity other than CCE to become accredited. And that process is ongoing. It isn't dead yet, although they're certainly doing their darndest in the WFC to
Yeah.
maintain their monopoly control.
Well, you did a post. I don't know when this post was. I saw it. I think it was a fairly recent post. Um, so we're kind of moving into the territory of looking at the chiropractic profession as a whole right now, and what
Yeah.
people are wanting to do about it. And you had created this post. I'm assuming it was on Facebook that I saw it, and you were talking about naturopathy as a profession
Hmm.
and how they are moving to some type of a 10-year recertification type of program,
Yes.
and you have worries that this could be something that the chiropractic profession might do as well. Is there an actual movement from one of the organizations in chiropractic pushing towards that, or is it something else?
I haven't heard anyone publicly articulate it, but what I have seen is that the chiropractic profession tends to mimic what other professions are doing. And in medicine, this has become a very controversial thing. They call it MOC, maintenance of certification. So if you are a certified specialist, and everyone is, even in family medicine, which in the old days, GPs. Now we have
Yeah.
specialists in family medicine. If you're any kind of physician in the medical world, most are required to do these MOC things, maintenance of certification. Some are grandfathered in from the days before then. The naturopathic profession in many jurisdictions now requires this, where you essentially have to do this recertification examination, which can be quite rigorous.
Now, is this in
And
lieu of CE credits, or is that on top of CE
on
credits?
top of,
Oh, geez.
yeah. So the slippery slope was you get your license, keep your nose clean, you'll be fine. Oh, we got to do continuing education hours. 12 hours of anything you like will be okay. Oh, not good enough. We need more hours, and we need specialized hours for different states. And the associations will use that as their cash cow to fund their lobbying efforts to keep us in power. And then they said, let's see what else we can get away with. And I remember at Palmer, they decided that chiropractors needed instruction in physical therapy. And Palmer said, never happened here. What we'll do is we'll have someone from another college, Logan, Dr. Fink was his name. I remember I took the course, so that you can get the physical therapy hours that you need in states like Florida and ultimately in Iowa. So there was a written PT exam. And they said, oh, no, not good enough. You have to do it on real people. So they said, okay, we'll do it on each other. We'll run a vibrator up somebody's back and we'll say we did a PT treatment. Oh, not good enough. Has to be done on real patients. So next thing you know, there's a physical therapy clinic in the Palmer outpatient clinic, but they said it's in a different room. Yeah. People clearly see that there's a difference between chiropractic adjusting and subluxation correction and physical therapy. Yeah, sure they do. And then finally they said, you got to do it on real people and integrate it with the chiropractic care. So that was the slippery slope there.
Yeah.
So there's
always
no
that.
doubt in my mind that something very similar is likely to happen, and that we may well be traveling to a centralized location unless we're able to stop this.
Now, you said that you have not heard of anybody specifically pushing it right now. But with that in mind, there always has been this dichotomy within our profession and this combativeness within our profession. More so than I think with most professions, it's a self-defeating type of thing. Although I will tell you, I have met quite a few new students coming out of the colleges who know nothing of mixer straight ideas. Nothing. And when I mention it, they're like, no clue, which I think is kind of a good thing, right? That way, maybe it's not a good thing, but it's at least it's not that infighting idea. But you've got the IFCO, you've got the ICA, you got the ACA. Are those lines still exactly as they always have been between those agencies? And
no, it's very different. And in the old days, people knew that chiropractic was the analysis and adjustment, if necessary, of vertebral subluxations for the fullest expression of life. Everyone knew that. But then there were those who said, well, let's do some other stuff. And again, there's a temporal relationship between that mindset and the availability of third-party pay. So people would say, well, how about supplements? How about electrotherapy? How about this or that? Why not do that? And that's when so-called mixing began. People didn't say there's no such thing as a vertebral subluxation. They said, I do that. Of course I adjust vertebral subluxations if indicated. And I do it well, but I do all this other stuff too to help support the person on other levels. So that was the concept of mixing, which, you know, I don't know. What do you think? I think we need to clearly define what chiropractic is and what it isn't so that the marketplace can see the difference. But now we've got something far more pernicious. We have the subluxation deniers, the denialism movement. People who say there's no such thing as a vertebral subluxation. And that's an entirely different animal. And these are people who don't know anything about straights versus mixers because they don't know what chiropractic is. Perhaps they were taught that chiropractic is the episodic symptomatic treatment of musculoskeletal pain using whatever technology the state will let you employ. Some of them are taught that there's no difference between chiropractic adjustment and spinal manipulative therapy. And that started way back when, in 1975, when the then Department of Health, Education, and Welfare convened a conference of the National Institute of Communicative Diseases and Stroke, NINCDS, in 1975. And they said, we want to bring chiropractors, osteopaths, medical manipulators, and basic scientists together to define what we know and don't know about spinal care so that we can create a structure that can work within our funding system. So, Walter Wardwell, a sociologist, said, here's what we need. We need to make all of this generic. We shouldn't talk about osteopathic lesions, chiropractic vertebral subluxations, etc., etc. We should talk about spinal manipulative therapy. And it was there that the various professions took the first giant step toward homogenation instead of differentiation, and where the lexicon for each, while presented at that conference, has been deteriorating ever since. I remember, this was kind of fun. I was one of the 11 chiropractors who was selected to go. And that was probably because I was working in the research department of Palmer at the time. And yikes. And that was before all the stuff with my leaving the faculty happened. But the harbinger of things to come was the letter that they sent to me. And I picked this up instantly, and most people just let it pass. I said, have you read the inside address on that thing? And it says, yes. It says, Palmer College of Chiropractic Medicine. I said, I don't think that's a mistake. And they just said, oh, come on, paranoid, blah, blah, blah.
Semantics. It's just semantics.
That's just words. So, at that point, they decided to use that terminology. And Walter Wardwell said that chiropractic should become a medical specialty like optometry, podiatry, or dentistry, which doesn't challenge the fundamental tenets of medicine.
Yeah, who wants to challenge things, right? I mean,
that's when it all started.
Status quo.
He said that's how, we can all be one big happy family. Nobody will fight each other. We're all doing the same stuff. And I remember visiting Erwin Core, who was the leader of the osteopathic movement, to differentiate. And he said, "You've spent so much time trying to become accepted, you've forgotten the reason why you sought acceptance, and that was to give your unique contribution to health to the world. And that ain't happening." So I was so spizzed up about that. I remember we rented an airplane, went up to see him, and he said, wow. We actually gave him a copy of D.D. Palmer's Adjuster with a tribute to his work and an illustration. He was just blown away because he thought that they had perhaps taken the wrong fork in the road. And I said, I'd really like to kidnap you and bring you into the chiropractic profession. And he kind of laughed. But yeah, that's when it happened. And about that same time, the Veterans Administration was talking about inclusion of chiropractic care in some of their programs. And it was at that point, I think, another critical decision to our detriment was made. And they said there are systems of healing and there are procedures, techniques. And he said, for example, acupuncture and oriental medicine, that's a system. Homeopathic medicine is a system. But spinal manipulative therapy is a procedure.
Indeed.
And when they made us a procedure and made that procedure generic manipulative therapy, voila. And again, I won't lie and say some of my best friends are mixers or deniers. But I will say I've met, pleasant, committed people who really want to help folks in pain. And as I said, we have to offer grace to those who never heard the chiropractic story.
And unfortunately, what you're describing are chiropractors themselves who've never heard the chiropractic.
And I've said, how can I be upset with a person who's never been told what chiropractic is?
That's a
who's
travesty.
Never studied the vertebral subluxation. And I've sometimes used the analogy, it's kind of like a child that's raised in an abusive home. They think that's normal.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears just a little bit. It's still the same topic, but I want to change the gear just a little bit. In my early iteration, I taught philosophy at Life West for 3 years. Dean Miller at the time, I can't remember her first name, but Dean Miller was in charge of philosophy. She invited me to come in and teach philosophy. And when I looked at the curriculum, I said, will you let me change things? Because this is not a philosophy course. This is just a history course. Mm-hmm. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, there's this. She goes, well, all that has to stay in there because of the curriculum guidelines. I said, okay, but I'm not going to teach it unless I can actually teach it philosophy. So she's, what do you mean? I said, well, we need to put in the branches of philosophy. We need to put in metaphysics and ethics and epistemology, and we have to put that in there. And that was something that I got solely from you and Patrick. And so I changed the curriculum and we put that in there, and I got to teach that. And what I see, I have no doubt you'll agree with me, at least to a certain degree with this. What I see as the largest problem or largest separation, the thing that separates us the most when it comes to what we were just talking about, those who are the deniers of subluxation versus the others. When we look at that, it's really no different than what it is that separates our country right now. We've got MAHA. Okay. We can talk all about that too. We got MAHA, which is finally a movement that's moving in a direction that we really want it to go in so many different ways. But there's the group that are not challenging MAHA, they're attacking MAHA, right? Mm-hmm. It really goes back to that difference between a mechanistic and vitalistic view of our body and health and where does health come from. And
Yeah.
it's that separation of paradigm, and it's the clash of paradigms that is what we're seeing. And it's, how do we get through that? Because it's so difficult to change a paradigm. It's so difficult to get someone with a totally different paradigm to see your point of view.
Well, I remember an interview I had, and I was asked, how can you change the culture? In this case, it was of an institution, when it takes 5 to 10 years to change a culture. I said, no, it doesn't. She looked shocked. And she was kind of a know-it-all type anyway. And she said, well, how can you say that? I said, you can change a culture in a matter of months. Now she really looked at it. She said, how? I said, ever heard of COVID? Did that change a culture? How long did it take? And I said, what was the tool? Fear of the unknown and a feeling of helplessness. Why in the allopathic world are people so terrified of cancer and communicable diseases? Because they think they're helpless. And if you say, oh, I can help you. I've got this vaccine, I've got this drug, I've got this and that. And if you take the vaccine, you won't get COVID. Oh, just kidding. You won't get it as bad, maybe. And if you take the vaccine, you don't have to wear a mask. Well, yeah, maybe you do. And on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I think that we can create a cultural shift from dependency to independence by flipping that paradigm. And this is our chance. This is I've often called it the Aikido moment. Matt McCoy and I call it that, where, you just flip the energy and you take their energy and it goes. When I was a child, people who went to medical doctors, what did they do? They came, maybe probably to your house, by the way.
Yeah.
They knew you, they knew your family, they knew everything about you. And come over and they'd do an exam and they'd talk, and maybe they'd have a cup of coffee and give you some drugs, maybe give you some, maybe not give you drugs. The few times I remember having a pediatrician come over when all else had seemingly failed, he'd just say something that, well, don't eat for 24 hours, or, have some burnt toast. That'll settle your stomach. Things like that, And then maybe give you a prescription. Sometimes he'd give you a prescription for cough syrup or something like that. And then he'd go. No,
Yeah.
he didn't say, you have to take that cough syrup for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
Yeah.
And, even if he was promoting tonsil surgery or something. Oh, and by the way, where did paralytic polio come from? Oh, guess what's temporally related to that? Tonsillectomies. It's one. Get rid of the lymph nodes. And another art form that I may have been subjected to, they didn't keep records in those days, but irradiation of the thymus gland of newborns, because they thought hypertrophy of the thymus caused SIDS, or what we now call SIDS.
Yeah.
So
Reaching for straws. Reaching for straws.
that's a nice double whammy. So yeah.
Well, you talk about COVID. It's a perfect example, but it's funny because COVID shifted things, but it also created some more deeper entrenched lines too at the same time. So you converted a lot of people over
Hmm.
So, the people that created the whole COVID pandemic thought they were going to get a certain goal, and it backfired in their face. And all these people who were on one side are now coming over to the side that we are on.
Hmm.
But at the same time, there's a whole group of people that are entrenched themselves even deeper in a mechanistic philosophy. I mean,
Sure.
they've gone hardcore.
Yeah.
Um, Fabrizio Mancini had an article that he wrote recently. I don't remember where I saw it at, as in one of the things that gets sent to my office, which
Hmm.
may be chiropractic economics or something. I'm not sure. But in that article, he mentions uh, this Maha moment as
Hmm.
kind of being a an opportunity for chiropractic. That
Hmm.
that this is a golden opportunity for chiropractic to take a leadership position in health. I'm not quoting him. This is just
Hmm.
kind of what he was saying,
Yeah.
but and I think he meant it in a good chiropractic way, in the sense of taking a
Hmm.
leadership position of natural being a natural type of person, not a medical doctor. Um,
Well, I
but
think it has to go to autonomy and control.
yeah.
And people don't like being deceived. They don't like half-truths. Um, the fact that so many people are now questioning vaccines,
Hmm.
the fact that so many people now are questioning the need to take drugs for the rest of their lives, um, that's a major turning point. And I've even read articles that even veterinarians are having patients question them about animal vaccines. And I remember when Dr.
100%.
Large and I were talking about that way back when. And yeah, people are saying autonomy.
The
And for
person who's
example,
the person who's the guest right before you,
yeah,
okay? The most recent interview is a holistic dentist, or
uh,
sorry, not dentist, a veterinarian, holistic veterinarian.
uh,
And we had that whole conversation about vaccines. So it's exactly what we
oh,
talked about.
I'll tell you a quick dog story that probably no one knows about. I love dogs. So anyway, I had lost two dogs to cancer, and I had a third one, and she had been diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And I remember reading in a news thing about a point counterpoint thing between two veterinarians, one who had an alternative approach and the other who was a conventional oncologist. And basically, to make a long story short, the dog needed an emergency operation because a complete blockage in her GI tract. And the good news is you can get a surgical team with a certified specialist at the helm in the middle of the night on Saturday, and it's expensive.
Very
But anyway,
expensive.
they did their thing, and she said, we'll get the biopsy back tomorrow. So I asked her, I said, what's the biopsy show? She said, I think you better come in. I said, I'll come in, but that's all you need to tell me. So she was talking about, chemotherapy protocols and referred me to a dog oncologist. That was one nice thing about living in the metropolitan area in the Northwest. I mean, they had such things. Um, and I remember this guy saying, I can't believe that you're even hesitating at accepting our recommendations. We have people who drive miles to come here to get this level of care and blah, 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 blah. And he was saying, maybe 6 weeks to 6 months. And, and he said, science-based, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, what have you got? I said, all I was able to find on PubMed, which made him nervous because, I never tell him who or what I am. This is all I could find. You said, well, that's all there really is. But, we're using human protocols and they have pretty good evidence and blah, 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 blah. So then I want to talk to this other guy. So I called this other guy and he was a character. I mean, I liked him right off the bat. I sent him all this stuff. And again, he didn't know. What do you think the first words out of his mouth were? He said, well, he said, I looked at the imaging and the labs and such, and he said, first thing you need to do is get this dog to a chiropractor. Just like that.
Ah,
And I said, well, I am a chiropractor. He said, great. He said, if you're not working on your dog, get a veterinary chiropractor, a chiropractor certified in animal chiropractic that can do it. I said, cool. And he said, okay, here's what you need to do. And he said, this. And he explained it all. He said, I'll tell you how it works. I usually don't, but he explained this interferes with this pathway and this does that and this facilitates that and blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay. Can this be done in conjunction with traditional oncology treatment? He said, nope. And I said, no. And he said, no. He said, they're destroying the immune system. We're building it up.
there you go.
And he said, you can't sit on the fence. He said, you know where the stick goes if you're sitting on the fence. And, I, of course, liked him right away. And he said, okay. He said, I'll give you the good news first. He said, it's very likely your dog will live at least 2 more years if you do this. And I said, well, what's the bad news? He said, it's going to cost more than the chemo. But anyway, bottom line is it worked.
Yeah.
And that's it. And about this time, I was putting together the evidence-informed stuff. And what I realized, there was a little clip that I got of a medical doctor, a pediatrician of all things. And he said, all right, he said, I've got a question for all of you folks. He said, what cancer in women is associated with the greatest number of deaths? He said, if you said breast cancer, you aren't even close. He said, how about men? He said, if you said prostate cancer, you're not even close. And I'm not saying these aren't serious things. He said, but the number one cancer in both is lung cancer. How many of you knew that? And he said, what do you think is the leading cause of death in the elderly? I said, you said cancer, you're wrong again. It's cardiovascular disease. And he said, and for cardiovascular disease, there's stuff we can do that's very effective that costs nothing. And I thought that was pretty cool. Although he said, this is in no way diminishing the significance of it.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, no.
Yeah. He said, most people don't know any of this. So, what does it cost to get sunlight? What does it cost to go for a walk? What does it cost to fellowship with people who you care about? What does it cost to have friends? What does it cost to eat reasonably good food? Maybe a little more, not a lot more.
Yeah. Gotta give the good stuff to the body.
So, there will be those who want, doctor, just tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be those who say, I want to take control of my life. I want to take back my life. In fact, and again, nothing negative at all about Maha. I'm involved with them. But they, I said, if it were up to me, I'd just call it Ma. Because Make America Healthy again, when was it ever healthy? Not in my lifetime.
Yeah, you'd have to go back pretty
You have to go pretty far.
Yeah. The funny thing is, and I made this comment decades ago, that it seems like for us to create something healthy, we always have to reach backwards in time. So for example, at first, it was always our community that was at the forefront of saying, hey, this is wrong. These excitotoxins are bad. We shouldn't have them. Oh, this plastic bottle is bad. Long before they ever said it was our communities that were saying these things. But I would say, plastic? No, no, no. Now we got to go to like a stainless steel. And you know what they used to call that? A canteen, right? So we're
Yeah.
going backwards in time to the canteen because that's healthier than the plastic water bottle.
Oh, I remember in the very early days of my practice in Davenport, 74, 75, 76, somewhere in there. I had read this paper by Dr. Ott was his name, and he invented the Ott light and what he called Vitalites. And the idea was there should be full spectrum lighting.
Aha,
There
ahead of his
should be
time.
shielding on the ends to stop electromagnetic radiation and all of this stuff. And he had done studies of children with what we would now call ADHD in classrooms, where the only difference was the lights.
Yeah.
Most people couldn't tell. But I remember one weekend I said, I'm going to do this. And I bought all these Vitalites and replaced my fluorescents with the Vitalites, which looked exactly the same. And I had people say, I don't know what you changed, but something is different in here.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Light is powerful. It's very powerful.
light is powerful, but it's not chiropractic. It's just part of what I did to remove negatives from their experience.
You
I
know,
had another one actually she was a social worker, and she said, you know what I wish you'd do? And I said, what? And she said, stop playing rock music. Put something soothing on. Because, I use rock music because I always felt best when I was just a little bit beyond comfortably busy. It was a little bit of a stretch, but it wasn't overwhelming. So I'd have all this. She said, put something more soothing on. When I did that, another, many remarks like, why didn't you do that before? Why didn't we have to listen to that rock and roll music? Yeah, it's the 60s and I'm an old hippie. What can I tell you?
Well, I want to as a closing conversation, come back to just what you think the average chiropractor can do to, assist or help the profession. What can we do? What can the average chiropractor do to help the profession? What is the best thing that they can do?
Practice chiropractic.
I love that answer. I love that answer.
And by chiropractic, what do I mean? I mean, going back to our lexicon,
Tick.
the analysis and adjustment, if necessary, of vertebral subluxations for the optimum expression of the totality of the human experience. And to me, that is the heart of what it is. If we can differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, if we can let everyone know that that is what chiropractic is, we have a chance. But there are some very significant challenges, and I'll tell you one that most people don't even think about. And I became aware of this in two situations. There are a couple studies in chiropractic you may be familiar with. One, of course, was the Nichols study, which involved hypertension. And it was published in the Journal of Hypertension. And they found in this study that individuals who got NUCA care, which is a form of upper cervical care from Dr. Nichols, had a reduction in hypertension that was similar to that of taking 2 pharmacologic agents. Wow. So, lots of media flurry. Said, well, how many chiropractors are there? They initially said, oh, in the US, probably around 70,000. They just said, gee, that's a shame. That's not nearly enough. Only 70,000 people who know how to do this? And they said, well, no.
Less than
This is a
that for the NUCA.
specialized technique. Well, how many people are there who do that technique? less than 100, maybe 30 something. And then there was Jay Holder with his work in addiction care.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Jay had studies published in, some prestigious journals like the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs and so forth. And he actually had an addiction treatment facility that used chiropractic care. And he became involved with Janet Reno when she was in charge of drug courts. And they were saying, what can we do for addicts? And it was something very similar. And he said, look at these results. And she said, that's phenomenal. And this is certainly an option. A drug court could say, if you do this, and you stay clean, we won't prosecute you. How many people are there trained in this? Same story. So we need to preserve the integrity of what chiropractic is. We need to effectively communicate it. And we need to have pathways to chiropractic qualification that don't take 7 to 8 academic years, that don't cost $250,000 or more.
Yeah, it's a big thing now. Yeah.
And if we can do that, I'm counting on there being enough people who want to exercise their autonomy as human beings, regardless of which side they're on, that the choice is up to them.
Yeah. Good. I like that answer. That's a good answer. That's a really good answer. Well, Dr. Kent, my first interview of this year was Dr. Brian Hooker.
Oh, yes. He was great.
And, did you watch the interview?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
I watched a couple to see what it was like.
Well, I started
had no idea what could go on for 2 hours.
Easy conversation, right?
And see how they did it. Most people,
easy conversation.
Just 10 minutes, go. Yeah.
I like the long format because it allows you to relax and just have a conversation. The conversation then meanders where it needs to go, and it's always
organic. I love that myself.
Yeah. But I started something with him. I forgot to do it on my last interview, so this is still a process where I asked a couple of questions at the end. I don't know if you remember him doing that, and so I'm going to ask those questions of you today. And the first one is, what is it that annoys you the most?
Apathy.
Ooh.
People who know better but don't do it. The old concept of, if not you, who? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. That's what annoys me. You can disagree with me, but if you're doing nothing, I'm not impressed.
Love that answer. Love that answer. Apathy.
Apathy.
Yeah. I can feel myself
being comfortably numb. I remember Pink Floyd, I have become comfortably numb. Well, that's what they want you to be.
Yeah.
Both sides, so that they can control you.
Very good. And then the last question.
Yeah.
Is the complete opposite. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy is hearing people like you saying that something we did altered your life for the better and helped bring chiropractic to others.
Well, I am very happy that I brought you some joy then.
Yes, well, you certainly did. I mean, it doesn't happen nearly as often as I wish it did, but I do run into people. We did some this weekend at Showcase Sherman, where we have prospective students and their parents and significant others or whatever coming to visit the college. And they always open with the line that I used to dread, but now I just roll with it. I bet you don't remember me. And, it goes from there, and they'll talk about, 20 years ago, I heard you speak at wherever and changed the whole direction of my chiropractic trajectory.
Well, I wish for you that you hear even more of that, because you have been stalwart in chiropractic for many decades now. And I think without your many, many different pathways that you have taken in chiropractic, whether it's the science end of it, or it's the philosophy end of it, or it's the governmental political end of it. All of those have made big differences in chiropractic. Don't let anybody ever tell you differently.
Well, all of these things were done because situations arose where I felt acquiring those skills would be useful.
And you were correct.
I didn't
You were correct.
get an MBA because I wanted to be an accountant. Thanks.
I cannot see you as an accountant. That does not compute.
Give you another piece of truth. Here's something no one knows. I graduated magna with the MBA, and the reason I didn't get summa was because my lowest grade was in accounting. And I only had one course left. It was accounting. I had done all this stuff, and the professor, who, trying to help, but he said, I'd really like to see some more detail in your calculations and do some more ratios comparing another company. He said, if you do that, you can get the A, but if you don't, he said, I'm afraid the best I could do with what you've submitted so far is a B plus. I said, I'll take it. Just wanted it maybe to be done.
No doubt. Oh,
yeah.
Well, doctor, I'm going to wrap things up here, but if you will, hang out for a moment.
Okay, sure.
For all of you watching, I hope you found this as entertaining and as educational as I did. And until next time, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.